You ever have someone walk up to your property like they're touring a museum, then smile at you like you're the exhibit? That's how it started, with a blazer, a camera, and the kind of smile that says, "I already emailed legal." 3 weeks after she moved in, my new neighbor tried to claim my lake. Not metaphorically, legally, with newsletters, ballots, and a man in a suit who smiled like he already owned it. It started with a glossy HOA pamphlet in my mailbox, showing a photo of my dock, my water, under the headline "Underused Community Treasures." I didn't know whether to laugh or laminate the deed. The article never mentioned my name, but it might as well have. It talked about shared recreational opportunities and quoted a so-called legal consultant named Derek Vaughn. That's lawyer speak for buckle up, something dumb's about to get official. The whole thing felt like someone photoshopped my backyard into a brochure I never agreed to be in, and right then I realized I wasn't dealing with curiosity. I was dealing with a campaign. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're tuning in from, especially if your HOA's ever borrowed something that wasn't theirs. If you're into wild stories with real grit, legal twists, and a little neighborhood drama sprinkled like fertilizer, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Tomorrow's tale? Even juicier. And the next surprise? Let's just say Karen ain't ready. Her name was Savannah Drake. She walked like her heels filed lawsuits and talked like every HOA meeting was a Senate hearing. She'd introduced herself 2 weeks earlier by strolling down my gravel path in a cream blazer and saying, "This lake is just breathtaking. We should host something here for the community." "We" was doing a lot of work in that sentence. I told her, politely, that the lake was private, inherited, surveyed, fenced with paperwork, not just cedar. She smiled like I'd just told her no one could touch the Mona Lisa. And then, apparently, she decided to redraw the museum floor plan. By the time I finished reading her second HOA newsletter, there were diagrams, literal diagrams. My dock had a proposed kayak rental station labeled on it. I took the letter, stapled to the back, and walked straight to my neighbor Walt's place. Walt Lanning was 62, a retired zoning inspector with a nope face and a gut-level instinct for bureaucratic nonsense. He read the letter once and muttered, "They're gonna try to zone your piece out of existence." The letter called for mandatory discussion about recreational reallocation and claimed absence would be counted as agreement. That's not a meeting invite, that's blackmail with water bottles. I showed up that Sunday to a community center that had been converted into a courtroom. Savannah had slides, she had bottled water, she had a man beside her in a Navy suit named Derek Vaughn who called himself a volunteer advisor, which I now know means paid saboteur. Her first slide, a full-screen photo of my lake with the words, "Lakeview Community Recreation Plan." That's when I knew. I wasn't attending a meeting. I was attending a soft invasion. I stood up halfway through the presentation and told everyone the lake wasn't theirs. It wasn't vague, it wasn't disputed, it wasn't some forgotten puddle behind a cost code. My grandfather bought it in 1954 and kept every document tighter than a tax audit. But I was immediately branded uncooperative. Savannah cocked her head and said, "We're not trying to take anything, Eli, we're trying to share." Nothing chills your spine like the word share when lawyers are in the room. A vote was raised. It passed. 9-5. The HOA now had permission to explore legal avenues for community access to private assets. That's when Derek walked up to me, smiling like he'd just sold a used car, and said, "Let's talk options before this gets expensive." That was the moment I realized this wasn't petty, this wasn't personal. This was professional, and I'd just become the roadblock in a very profitable plan. That night, I sat on my dock where my grandfather used to fish and tried to figure out how a woman with a newsletter managed to flip a neighborhood. And then I remembered something he told me when I was 12. They'll never kick your door in with a gun. They'll smile, say it's a community issue, and mail you into surrender. At the time, I didn't get it. Now, I could frame it. They weren't coming for my lake with bulldozers. They were coming with clipboards, bylaws, and a guilt trip so polished it looked like democracy. But they forgot something. I don't play well when you threaten what was handed down to me. My name's Eli Bennett. That lake is mine. And Savannah, she's about to learn that when you pick a legal fight with a man who's got nothing left to lose, you better bring more than a PowerPoint. They didn't start with a lawsuit. They started with snacks and bottled water. That Sunday, I walked into the Pine Hollow Community Center and realized something was off before the slideshow even began. There were rows of perfectly lined chairs, an agenda printed in color, and Savannah Drake standing front and center like she was hosting a tech conference. She smiled like she'd just reinvented water. "Welcome, neighbors," she chirped, wearing a navy blazer and pearls like HOA armor. Behind her was a projector screen with the words Lakeview Community Enhancement Proposal floating over an aerial shot of my lake. Not the lake. Not a lake. My lake. Taken without permission, edited with sparkle, and now starring in a presentation I hadn't been invited to help create. If that already feels like a punch, hold on. They hadn't even brought out the lawyer yet. Entered Derek Vaughn, tall, polished, the kind of man who wears confidence like cologne and charges by the minute for breathing. Savannah introduced him as a volunteer legal advisor who just so happened to specialize in community asset realignment. He thanked her like he was accepting a trophy, then launched into a speech so rehearsed I swear I saw cue cards in his binder. In reviewing historical land records, he said, "We've observed inconsistencies regarding communal access zones dating back several decades. Translation, we're going to pretend your grandfather's deed was written in crayon." He waved around zoning maps like magic tricks and used phrases like beneficial equity restructuring and communal boundary reevaluation. Meanwhile, the room nodded along like they were watching a cooking show. I could feel it, the narrative shifting, and not in my favor. Savannah jumped back in like a hype woman with a microphone. "Imagine a space where families can fish, paddle, gather," she said, arms wide like she was selling me my own sunset. "We're not trying to take anything, we're inviting everyone in." The irony hung so thick I could have bottled it. They framed this whole campaign like a goodwill gesture, a kumbaya moment, but make no mistake, this was a land grab wearing a name tag. Then came the kicker, a slide showing side-by-side photos of other successful transformations, complete with artificial docks, picnic tables, and quotes from residents in other towns. "Recreational integration creates cohesion," she smiled. I nearly choked. You know what else creates cohesion? Boundaries, fences, property lines that don't get rewritten because someone with a newsletter thinks they'd look better open to the public. When I finally stood up, I didn't raise my voice, didn't wave my arms. I simply said, "This land was bought in 1954 by my grandfather. It was surveyed again in 78. It's private, and it's not available for any kind of integration, recreation, or beautification." Silence. A few folks shifted in their seats. Walt Lanning gave me a single nod from the back row, but Savannah, she smiled like she pitied me. "Of course," she said sweetly, "and we're so glad you're here to be part of the discussion, but we also have to think about the entire community." That word, entire, hit like a gavel. Suddenly, I was on the other side of the aisle, a man with a lake he wasn't sharing, a holdout, the guy standing in the way of neighborhood unity. If you've ever felt your name get turned into a sigh, you know what I mean. Stay with me, it gets worse before it gets clever. They handed out ballots like flyers at a county fair. The motion? Authorize further legal exploration into access models for underutilized neighborhood assets. That was code for, let's figure out how to crack his title open like a soda can. Darla Knox, the HOA secretary, stood at the back collecting votes, looking like she was chewing glass. 9 in favor, 5 opposed, she finally said. That was it. Motion passed. I was officially under legal exploration, which, let me tell you, is just a polite phrase for target acquired. I looked around the room. people I'd shared coffee with, fixed fences for, waved at on Saturdays, nodding like this was all reasonable. I didn't even know who half of them were anymore. That's the thing about community theater. It only takes one cast change to flip the entire script. You blink, and suddenly you're playing the villain in your own story. After the vote, I gathered my things and started toward the door. That's when Derek slid over, like he'd been waiting for his closing argument. "Mr. Bennett," he said, smooth as lacquer, "this doesn't have to become contentious. I think we can come to a mutual understanding." I turned to him, deadpan. "Yeah? Like understanding that private property isn't a community whiteboard?" He chuckled softly, like I was quaint. "These things go smoother when both sides are flexible." I told him I wasn't built to bend, and I wasn't about to start now. His smile never faltered. "Well then," he said, "I suppose we'll proceed accordingly." That's when I knew. This wasn't about kids swimming or neighbors connecting. This was a business plan. A polished, strategic, pressure-packed plan to wear me down and make it look like my idea. And if they thought they could win with slides and smiles, they hadn't met the stubborn in my bloodline. I went home that night and sat on the dock my grandfather built. That man fought in Korea, came home with scars, and still poured every bit of peace he had left into this land. He used to say, "Don't trust anyone who offers you a deal before you ask for one." Sitting there, I finally understood what he meant. They weren't offering peace. They were offering surrender disguised as consensus. And while they were out there passing motions and measuring lines, I was sitting on decades of legacy. You can take pictures of it, you can vote about it, but it's still mine. And the more they pushed, the deeper I dug in. Because some things don't belong on a ballot. They belong in blood. And Savannah? She was about to find out. When you try to turn someone's home into a shared asset, you better be ready for the fallout. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Before you go, ask yourself this. If they can vote on your property today, what else can they repackage tomorrow? This was just the beginning. Next, they show up with permits, clipboards, and something even worse than lawyers, technicians with matching polos. You won't believe what they tried next, so hit that subscribe button, drop a comment if you've ever tangled with a sneaky HOA, and get ready, because the real fight starts in the next episode. And trust me, they messed with the wrong dock. I woke up to the sound of voices by the water, clipboard voices, polite voices, the kind that ask questions they already have answers to. When I stepped outside, there were 4 of them. Khakis, tucked-in polo shirts, steel clipboards, and a white van parked like it owned the gravel. The side read, "EcoCheck Solutions" in vinyl letters so new they still had bubbles. No. They were conducting environmental evaluations, which apparently now comes with laminated IDs and 0 advance notice. One of them even waved. "Just routine testing, sir. Water quality stuff." I asked who sent them. He said it was requested by the HOA and backed by a community environmental health initiative. That was the moment I realized I wasn't being visited. I was being documented. If you thought the meeting was bad, wait until the HOA starts hiring their own scientists. I called Savannah, and of course she answered on the second ring, like she'd been expecting my name to pop up. "Eli, I was hoping you'd call," she said, in the voice people use when they've already filed paperwork. I asked her what authority she had to approve environmental testing on private property. She didn't miss a beat. "We're just being proactive. It's about the health of the whole neighborhood. I'm sure you want to be a responsible steward." That word steward landed like a slap-wearing perfume. I told her I hadn't authorized anything. She replied, "According to the permit, it's all within legal parameters under the Neighborhood Water Safety Act." She might as well have said too late. Savannah had found a way to make violating boundaries sound like community service. And worse? She said it with a smile. Walt came by later with 2 mugs of gas station coffee and a face that said, "Brace yourself." He'd been poking around, checking records, asking the kinds of questions Savannah hoped no one would. "EcoCheck?" he said. Registered out of a strip mall between a vape store and a shuttered Subway, just got their license last month. He handed me a printout with the address. They're not here for algae, Eli. They're building a case. Paper trail. That van's a prop. You're not the end game. They're setting up to flip half this neighborhood. I looked out at my lake, our lake, and felt like I was watching it shrink in real time. Walt wasn't being dramatic. He was being precise. And the moment you realize your properties become a pawn in a developer's long game, that's when things get very, very quiet inside your chest. And just when I thought they couldn't crank the pressure any higher, the HOA started community safety patrols. That's what the email said. In light of recent environmental concerns, we've organized rotating neighborhood watches to ensure ongoing compliance. Translation? Savannah had turned neighbors into documentarians. Every day, someone stood near my property line with binoculars or a notepad, jotting observations like they were training for an audit. One guy filmed my dog relieving himself near the dock and made a note about potential contamination. Another woman took pictures of the cattails, then circled them in red on a printout. You ever try to enjoy your morning coffee while a retired school teacher documents your weeds like she's working for the CDC? It wasn't surveillance, it was psychological warfare in beige slacks. Then came the court summons, delivered in a sealed envelope with legal weight that felt heavier than the paper it was printed on. Notice of preliminary injunction hearing, subject temporary access consideration. They were taking me to court to ask a judge to allow community access while the environmental matter was reviewed. My lake, my property, my signature nowhere. I felt like I'd just been sued by a neighborhood potluck. I sat down at the kitchen table, my grandfather's deed in one hand and that summons in the other, and I realized I was outgunned. The HOA had consultants. They had newsletters. They had Savannah's fake sweetness and Vaughn's fake legalese. All I had was a coffee-stained file folder and a head full of rage. So I did the only thing I could. I called every property attorney in a 50-mile radius, left messages, begged assistance. Explained the whole thing so many times I could recite it backward. Most never called back. But one did. Naomi Castillo, former public defender, specialized in land disputes and, from the sound of her voice, completely unimpressed by the nonsense I was describing. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "sounds like you've got yourself a case of weaponized bureaucracy. I've seen it before. I know how they move. And I don't like bullies hiding behind bylaws." That was the first breath I'd taken in days that didn't taste like frustration. She didn't just talk legal. She talked like someone who'd stood between regular people and polished predators more times than she could count. I emailed her every document I had, and she replied within an hour, "Let's meet. And let's go to war." Finally, someone who didn't flinch when the HOA brought out their clipboards. Someone who knew how to fight fire with filings. And trust me, what happened next? That's when the game changed. You'll want to hear this. It gets way better. And nastier. Naomi didn't waste time. Within 48 hours of signing on, she'd already poked holes in Derek Vaughn's resume, wide enough to park that fake EcoCheck van in. Turns out, Mr. HOA Legal Whisperer wasn't just a volunteer with a soft spot for bylaws. He'd been disciplined twice by the state bar for procedural misconduct and familiar to disclose third-party interests. Naomi grinned when she read that. "Third-party interests," she said, "is lawyer code for somebody's getting paid off the books." She dug deeper and found a network of shell companies, 6 of them, all tied to the same mailbox in Raleigh. The most interesting one? Greenstone Advisory, a tidy little outfit registered in Delaware, sending Savannah monthly consulting payments. And guess who owns Greenstone? Vaughn's cousin. If this was a jigsaw puzzle, the box just flipped over and we finally saw the picture. Walt came in swinging too. That man treats county records like a crossword. Relaxing, but deadly. He pulled every title plat and boundary document tied to my grandfather's original deed, including 2 resurvey certifications from 1978 and 2001. All of them showed the same thing: the lake, the dock, the cabin. Mine. There wasn't an inch of community access, ambiguity, or historical overlap. Walt slapped the folder on my table like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Crystal clear," he said. They can Photoshop all the maps they want. You've got the real ones. That gave us the legal backbone, but we still needed something else. Someone who understood how these schemes worked. Not from law school, but from survival. And that's when Ruth knocked on my door. Ruth McAdams had lived 2 blocks over for 35 years, widow, former librarian, and the kind of woman who could slice through nonsense with one raised eyebrow. She'd watched the newsletters, the meetings, the van, and knew exactly what it was. They did this in Willow Creek, she said. Same playbook. Environmental panic, HOA vote, elderly neighbors forced to sell. Then, boom, luxury townhome. She'd lost her old home that way and swore it would never happen again. They count on us being tired, quiet, confused. That's how they win. And just like that, the resistance had a historian. Ruth started showing up with binders, news clippings, and first-hand testimony. Between Naomi's law, Walt's records, and Ruth's lived experience, we weren't just gathering evidence, we were building a case loud enough to cut through the HOA's manufactured politeness. And then Naomi uncovered the kicker. EcoCheck Solutions, the so-called environmental watchdog group, wasn't just shady. It was freshly baked, 4 weeks old, registered under Vaughn's brother-in-law's name. No staff, no licenses, no previous contracts, just a shiny website, a P.O. box, and a team of clipboard-carrying volunteers with no credentials and a lot of attitude. Naomi printed the LLC paperwork and laid it on my kitchen table like it was a smoking gun. "They're not here to test water," she said. "They're here to create concerns they can reference in court." That's when it hit me. This wasn't some clumsy power grab. It was a coordinated campaign. Legal fraud disguised as environmental concern, funded by Shell money, and sold as civic duty. HOA wasn't a fence anymore. It was a funnel, and they were trying to pour me and half the neighborhood right out the bottom. I should have known the next move would be dirty, but I didn't expect it to be arrest-level dirty. I came home one evening to find a police cruiser in my driveway and Savannah standing by the mailbox with that same practiced pout. "I was afraid this might happen," she whispered, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. One officer asked if I was Eli Bennett. I said yes. He said I was under investigation for harassment and community safety violations. I thought it was a prank until he showed me the footage. Edited video me confronting the clipboard crew, stripped of context, spliced like a bad reality show. Naomi called it manufactured evidence. I called it character assassination. They cuffed me in my own front yard. My dog barked the whole time. Savannah watched like it was a parade. And that was the moment it stopped being private. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore. This was personal. This was public. And it wasn't just a fight over land anymore. It was a fight for everything I stood for. You'll want to hear what happened next, because when the cuffs came off, the gloves did too. If you thought fake lawsuits and edited footage were the worst they could throw at me, think again. Getting arrested was just their opening act. What came next? Let's just say the mask slips, the money trail talks, and Savannah's whole operation starts to crumble in public view. So if you're hooked now, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment if your HOA ever tried pulling a fast one, and don't miss the next chapter, because things are about to get federally interesting. Turns out, the only thing louder than a lie is proof. Naomi's investigator, some guy who looked like he could dismantle a hard drive with his mind, dug through a burner phone registered to one of Vaughn's shell companies. Inside were call logs, voice memos, and recordings that would have made a mob boss blush. Savannah Vaughn and a man named Greg Talbot, regional acquisition manager for a real estate development firm, plotting everything from neighborhood pressure tactics to a reputation softening strategy in case I lawyered up. One clip had Savannah saying, "Make Eli look difficult." That's the first step. Another had Vaughn replying, "If we control the narrative, we don't need to win court, we win perception." Naomi played it for me, stone-faced. "Congratulations," she said. "You're officially the main character in a scandal." I didn't know whether to laugh or throw up. All I knew was the mask was off, and now we had the receipts. Walt and Ruth wasted no time. They called a neighborhood meeting, not at the HOA center but Ruth's backyard, with folding chairs, lemonade, and a borrowed PA system from the local high school. It wasn't fancy, but it was packed. And this time it wasn't Savannah running the show, it was Truth. Walt walked the crowd through property records, map overlays, and legal documents like he was teaching a masterclass. Ruth stood up, steady and calm, and told everyone what happened to Willow Creek. "They called it community development," she said. "But we lost everything. Don't let them do it here." And then came the hammer. Darla Knox, the HOA secretary, stepped forward with her own file folder. "There's over $16,000, 0 cents in unauthorized legal consulting expenses," she said. "Approved by Savannah without board review, paid to shell companies linked to Derek Vaughn." And just like that, the mood flipped. Suspicion became anger. And Savannah? She had no script for this crowd. She tried, when the questions started flying. Who approved this? Why weren't we told? Is Greenstone real? Savannah switched gears like a guilty child. First came denial, then came deflection, then the classic HOA crowd pleaser, tears. "I was just trying to help the community," she sniffled. "I never meant to divide us." But nobody was buying the act, because crocodile tears dry fast under sunlight, and this time the truth was loud enough to drown them out. A man who voted for the lake plan just weeks earlier stood up and said, "You made us feel like he was the problem. You made me feel like I was doing the right thing." Savannah didn't respond. She just sat down, holding her jaw like it might fall off. The theater was over. Now it was testimony time. Naomi took it a step further. She leaked the evidence, not to gossip sites or HOA blogs. She went straight to a local journalist with a track record for sniffing out political corruption. And once the story hit the paper, it was game over. Developer tied to HOA legal action, resident targeted in scheme to seize private lake. Right there on the front page with quotes from Darla, Ruth, Walt, and even anonymous insiders who'd overheard hallway conversations. The same neighbors who once voted against me? They started showing up at my door with pies, handwritten apologies, and expressions of sincere regret. One man even offered to help fix my dock. I told him the dock was fine, but the gesture mattered, because in a town like ours, reputation isn't written in courtrooms. It's written in front porches. And I could feel mine being rewritten, one knock at a time. That's when the call came. Naomi got a ping from a DOJ contact. The FBI had opened an investigation. Greenstone Advisory, EcoCheck Solutions, Vaughn's network of shell firms, all under scrutiny. Apparently, our little lake dispute was just the tip of a much bigger iceberg. "You're not just a client anymore," Naomi said. "You're a witness." And suddenly, everything got sharper and the stakes got higher. We weren't just fighting an HOA, we were standing in front of something rotten that had spread across counties, maybe states. The courtroom battle was coming. But we weren't limping in as underdogs anymore. We had the truth, the files, the people. And for the first time, the wind was finally at our backs. What came next? Let's just say Vaughn should have picked a quieter neighborhood. Because the lake wasn't the only thing making waves now. The whole town was watching, and the fireworks hadn't even started. Courtrooms aren't made for peace. They're made for truth under pressure. And, if you're lucky, justice in fluorescent lighting. The morning of the hearing, Naomi walked in carrying 3 folders and a witness with a PhD in environmental science. The defense rolled in with Savannah, Vaughn, a wall of binders, and the same phony confidence they'd been selling door to door. What they didn't bring? Real data. Naomi opened strong. "Your Honor," she said, calm as morning coffee, EcoCheck Solutions is not a licensed testing agency. The report they submitted lacks peer review, field verification, and valid methodology. Then she turned it over to Dr. Myra Chen, who dissected the fake algae report like it was a middle school science project that cheated off Wikipedia. "This is not a health hazard," Dr. Chen said. "This is theater disguised as science." And with that, the curtains started falling. But don't blink, because the unraveling only gets better from here. Next came the money. Naomi brought in a forensic accountant who traced every dime. HOA funds funneled into shell companies, monthly payments from Greenstone to Savannah marked as consulting, invoices from EcoCheck that matched no services rendered. It wasn't a legal case anymore, it was a heist with spreadsheets. Vaughn tried to object, of course, but the judge she leaned over her bench and said, "Mr. Vaughn, if you raise one more baseless objection, I'll raise the issue of your license myself." That's when Vaughn's pen stopped moving. And Savannah? She started to shrink. Because the more they flipped through those documents, the more she realized this wasn't going to end in applause. It was going to end in permanent record. Then we played the footage. The kind Savannah thought would never see daylight. My security cameras had captured her on my dock at midnight, measuring planks and taking photos with her flash off. Another clip showed Vaughn handing a man in an EcoCheck shirt a white envelope in the alley behind the HOA office. They'd written a whole script and were just arrogant enough to perform it in public. And now, it was all playing back in 1080p. When Ruth took the stand, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "They did this to my neighborhood," she said. "We lost our homes, and they called it improvement. But I'm here today so no one loses their family legacy to a spreadsheet and a smug smile." There wasn't a dry eye on our side of the room. Because some testimony it just needs history. The ruling came down hard. The judge declared the lake private, the injunction void, and all HOA motions on the matter permanently banned. Savannah was removed from any leadership role, barred from handling funds, and referred for further investigation. Vaughn? She reported him to the bar on the spot. "This court does not tolerate manipulation dressed as governance," the judge said. "And it certainly won't allow it to be weaponized against legal ownership." Naomi didn't smile. She nodded, calm, collected, like this was just one more house of cards she'd seen collapse before lunch. Outside, reporters waited. And for the first time in months, I stepped into daylight without a target on my back. But this wasn't just a personal win. This was about something bigger than a lake. The FBI expanded the case within a week. Naomi's files were now part of a national probe into developer-backed HOA fraud. What happened in Pine Hollow? It turned out to be the prototype for similar attacks across 4 states. My name showed up in stories I didn't write, my doc in photos I didn't pose for, and my face quoted in an article titled "The Man Who Fought Back." I didn't ask to be that guy, but when someone tries to take your peace, your legacy, and your land, you fight. Not just for the property, but for the principle. Today I sit on that same dock. The water is still, the air is light. The neighbors who once doubted me now wave with both hands, and sometimes I swear I can hear my grandfather's voice in the wind, saying, "Told you, smooth talkers with bad paper, don't let 'em in." Turns out, some HOA Karens bring newsletters, others bring subpoenas, but me? I bring receipts. And in the end, that's what this whole thing was really about, not just a lake or land or some HOA clown show dressed in legalese, but legacy. See, they thought they could bury what my grandfather built under paperwork, peer pressure, and fake concern. They thought if they used enough buzzwords and bullet points, I'd fold. But here's the truth they didn't plan for. You don't get to vote on someone's history. You don't get to rename someone's roots. And you sure as hell don't get to turn someone's inheritance into a brochure without a fight. They didn't just lose a court case, they lost the script. Because once neighbors wake up and facts start talking, even the slickest schemes don't stand a chance. If you've been listening closely, I hope you caught the real point here. It's not about being loud. It's about being steady. It's about knowing what's yours, standing your ground, and outlasting the noise. We didn't win with shouting. We won with records, with truth, with people who decided that fear and fake paperwork weren't stronger than legacy and law. Because when communities remember who they are and who really protects them, the manipulators don't stand a chance. So if this story hit home, if it reminded you of something worth defending or made you think twice about Who's really making decisions behind those neighborhood smiles? Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Click that like button if you believe property rights and personal legacy still matter in this world. And don't forget to subscribe, as next time we've got another tale where justice shows up wearing work boots, not a suit. You don't want to miss what's coming, trust me. The next Karen? She didn't see that ending coming either.